Nothing but garbage. With those three venomous words, Donald Trump, now the 47th President of the United States, spat his contempt across the chamber. It wasn't just an insult to Jasmine Crockett. It was a declaration of war. In a country where over 62 million Americans have reported feeling betrayed by corruption, and nearly 70% say they no longer trust their leaders, this clash became more than politics. It became survival. Trump's arrogance filled the room like smoke, choking out reason. His words dripped with the same venom that has divided families, torn communities apart, and silenced voices for generations. But across from him stood Jasmine Crockett, the relentless warrior for justice, the woman he tried to dismiss with a single slur. What followed was not just a hearing, it was a reckoning that would shake the nation. Trump slouched into his chair with the arrogance of a man who believed the rules bent to his will. His tie hung loose, his eyes darted with disdain, and the weight of the chamber seemed to bow under his smirk. Every gesture screamed contempt for the process, for the people, and for anyone daring to challenge him. The gavel struck, echoing like thunder. Reporters shifted in their seats, pens poised, cameras locked. A hush fell over the room. The stage was set, and then Jasmine spoke. Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't hesitate. It cut through the silence like steel against glass. "Mr. President," she snapped, her eyes unflinching, "do you believe you stand above the law?" The question sliced the air. A question millions had wanted to ask. A question that bore the weight of history, of every broken promise, of every voice silenced by power. Trump leaned forward, squinting at her as though she were some trivial annoyance. He chuckled, low and mocking, before spitting out the words like venom. "She's nothing but a cheap congresswoman, a loudmouth looking for attention." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Some laughed nervously. Others froze, stunned by the audacity. The insult was more than personal. It was political theater, a declaration that he would not be tamed. Jasmine didn't flinch. If anything, her eyes burned brighter. "Cheap," she repeated, her voice rising with controlled fury. "The only cheap thing in this room is your integrity." The room erupted. Reporters scribbled frantically. Cameras zoomed. The sound of shutters clicked like machine guns. A spectator in the back muttered, "This isn't a hearing. It's a street fight." And they weren't wrong. Trump leaned back, smirking, relishing the chaos he had unleashed. His fingers drummed on the desk, every tap daring her to strike again. But Jasmine didn't hesitate. "You sit there," she continued, her tone sharp, "pretending to be untouchable, pretending the law doesn't apply to you. But millions of Americans have suffered because men like you believe rules are for others, never for yourselves." Her words hit like a hammer. Every syllable rang with the fury of the forgotten, the anger of the betrayed. Trump sneered. "Spare me the lecture. I built this country's success. You're a nobody riding my name to fame." The words were a slap, dripping with contempt. Yet Jasmine leaned forward, undeterred. Her voice dropped, steady, deliberate. "History doesn't remember bullies as builders, Mr. President. It remembers them as cowards." The air grew electric. Someone in the press pool whispered, "Did she just call him a coward?" But the cameras had already caught it, magnifying the moment for millions watching at home. Trump's face reddened, his jaw tightening. He jabbed a finger toward her, his voice booming across the chamber. "You don't get to lecture me. You don't belong here. You never did." And there it was, the raw, unmasked disdain, not just for Jasmine Crockett, but for everything she represented. Truth, justice, accountability. The chamber shook with noise, reporters shouting over each other, spectators gasping, some cheering, some jeering. This was no longer just testimony. This was combat. Jasmine straightened her posture, her presence towering even without height. She didn't shout back. She didn't need to. Her silence in that split second was deafening, an unspoken challenge, a promise that she would not break. Then she struck again. "Do you think the law is your servant, Mr. President? Or do you think the law is your enemy?" The question hung heavy, impossible to dodge, crafted with precision. The kind of question that forced truth into the open, no matter how much it burned. Trump laughed bitterly, shaking his head. You wouldn't understand power if it slapped you in the face. The law bends to strength, and I am strength. The arrogance was volcanic, spewing across the chamber. But Jasmine didn't falter. She seized his words, twisted them into a blade. No, Mr. President, you're not strength, you're fear. And fear is always temporary. The chamber erupted again. Reporters leaning forward, microphones straining to catch every word. Spectators on the edge of their seats. It was no longer a question of politics. It was survival of truth against the crushing weight of lies. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't backing down. What began with an insult, nothing but garbage, had transformed into a duel where every word was a weapon, every pause a landmine. From the very first minute, the hearing had become a battlefield, and the nation was watching. Trump knew it. He could feel the weight of every camera lens, every microphone, every pair of eyes glued to him. He wasn't here to testify. He was here to dominate. He slammed his palm against the desk, the sound cracking like a gunshot through the chamber. Enough of this circus, he roared, his voice rising above the gavel, above the murmurs, above the desperate attempts at order. This isn't justice. This is a witch hunt. The words detonated like grenades. Gasps rippled through the room. Some of his allies nodded furiously, pounding the table in rhythm, echoing his fury. Others, spectators, reporters, even members of Congress, sat stunned at the audacity. Trump leaned forward, his face a storm of red, his finger stabbing the air as though every accusation were a bullet he was firing. They dragged me here, he thundered, to smear me, to destroy me, because they're terrified. They know without me, they are nothing. He wasn't answering questions. He wasn't even pretending. He was performing. A man drunk on the sound of his own rage. Jasmine Crockett sat still, her eyes locked on him, refusing to blink. But Trump wasn't finished. Look around you, he shouted, sweeping his hand across the chamber. This isn't a hearing. It's a lynching. They've hated me since day one. They hated me because I'm not like them. I don't play their games. And now they send this nobody. His voice dripped with contempt as he motioned toward Jasmine. To lecture me about the law? A law she barely understands? The insult was savage, cutting deep. The room stirred, whispers darting like sparks in dry grass. Reporters scribbled furiously. A camera zoomed tight on Jasmine's face, searching for a crack, a flinch, a reaction. But she gave them nothing. Trump, emboldened by her silence, pressed harder. She's nothing but a mouthpiece, a prop. You think she cares about justice? No, she wants headlines. She wants fame. And you, he turned to the entire chamber, his voice swelling. You want a spectacle? Well, congratulations. You've got one. Because I will not bow, I will not break, and I will not be silenced. The chamber erupted. Applause from his loyalists clashed with cries of outrage. A reporter shouted, Mr. President, are you refusing to answer the question? But his voice was drowned beneath the chaos. Trump thrived in it. He fed on it. He pounded the table again, his fist rattling the microphones. This is a disgrace. I built this country back from ruin, and now you want to destroy me with lies. Lies and weak voices hiding behind false virtue. His eyes locked on Jasmine, sharp and venomous. You are a fraud, Crockett. You and everyone sitting in judgment here. Fraud, every last one of you. The words echoed like a curse, ricocheting off marble walls, searing into the ears of those who heard them. For a moment, the hearing teetered on the edge of collapse. The gavel struck again and again, desperate to restore order. But Trump's voice surged above it all. This chamber, he bellowed, has become a temple of hypocrisy, and I will expose every single one of you. It was theater. It was rage. It was raw power distilled into a man who had learned that shouting louder often meant winning. And yet, beneath the bluster, a truth lingered in the silence between his words. Fear. Because no matter how loudly he screamed, witch hunt, no matter how many times he spat the word fraud, the evidence loomed like shadows behind him. Evidence he couldn't shout away. The cameras caught it. The audience felt it. And Jasmine Crockett knew it. She leaned forward slowly, her composure unshaken, her voice quiet yet sharper than any roar. "Mr. President," she said, calm as steel, "witch hunts end when the truth comes out, and the truth always comes out." The chamber froze. For the first time since he began his tirade, Trump faltered, his lips parting, searching for words. But Jasmine didn't give him the chance. "You can pound this table until it breaks. You can insult me. You can insult this Congress. You can insult the American people. But you cannot outrun the truth." A hush blanketed the room. Reporters leaned forward, every keystroke trembling. Trump's face contorted, a mixture of rage and disbelief. He opened his mouth to strike back, but the weight of her words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a trial of power versus principle, a collision between arrogance and justice. And as Trump breathed fire, Jasmine Crockett stood in the flames, unburned. The silence that followed was electric, the kind that crackles before lightning strikes. Every camera lens zoomed in, every pen hovered, waiting for her reply. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she leaned forward, her words slicing through the air like tempered steel. "Mr. President," she began, each syllable deliberate, "you came here thinking you could turn this chamber into a stage for your rage. But let me remind you, this is not your rally. This is the House of Representatives. And here truth, not theatrics, decides the outcome." The words landed with the weight of a gavel. Trump sneered, ready to lash back, but Jasmine didn't allow him the opening. She reached for a folder stacked with documents, her hands steady, her movements precise. With a flick, she laid the papers out in front of her, the sound crisp, final, undeniable. "These are your words," she declared, holding up a transcript. "Not mine, not the media's, yours. You called for violence. You undermined the Constitution, and you profited while the nation bled." Gas rippled through the chamber. Trump's face flushed deeper, his jaw clenching. He tried to interject, but Jasmine's voice cut across his like a blade slicing through armor. "You call this a witch hunt?" "No, sir. A witch hunt ends when there is no evidence. But here," she slapped the transcript against the desk, the crack reverberating through the hall, "the evidence is staring us in the face." Half the chamber erupted in cheers, applause breaking through the tension like thunder. The other half, Trump loyalists, shouted over them, their voices raw with fury. The chamber split in two, a living fault line trembling under the weight of history. But Jasmine stood unwavering at its center. "You try to belittle me," she pressed on, her eyes locked on Trump's, unyielding, "to dismiss me as a nobody. But let me tell you something, Mr. Trump. I don't need your approval. I don't need your permission. What I need, what this country needs, is accountability, and that begins with you." The audience stirred, the tension unbearable. Reporters scrambled to capture every word, every gesture. Trump slammed his fist down. "This is a disgrace. You twist everything." But Jasmine raised her hand, silencing him without raising her voice. The authority in her gesture was undeniable. "No, Mr. Trump," she said firmly. "What's disgraceful is a president who thought himself untouchable. What's disgraceful is a leader who mocked the law while hiding behind it. What's disgraceful is trying to bury the truth under a pile of insults and lies." The crowd erupted again, half in cheers, half in boos. It was chaos, but within that chaos, Jasmine's voice rose higher, clearer, commanding. "You stand here shouting fraud, witch hunt, hypocrisy, hoping the noise will drown out reality. But reality doesn't vanish because you refuse to face it. Reality is written in these documents, recorded in these testimonies, carved into the memories of every American who watched their democracy assaulted." Her hands slammed onto the desk, punctuating every word. "And I will not, let me repeat, I will not allow you to bully this chamber, to bully the truth, or to bully this nation into submission." The roar of applause swelled, drowning out Trump's sputtering attempts to interrupt. People were on their feet now, clapping, shouting, their voices shaking the very walls. Jasmine's tone sharpened, her eyes gleaming with fire. "You call me a fraud. You call this body a fraud. But look in the mirror, Mr. Trump. Look long and hard. Because the fraud is not standing here before you. The fraud is sitting in that chair, pounding that desk, screaming at shadows because he cannot escape his own reflection. The words hit like lightning. For the first time, Trump faltered. His hands twitched against the table. His eyes darted, searching for a lifeline, some way to reclaim control. But the chamber was no longer his stage. It was Jasmine's arena. She leaned in closer, her voice lower now, but somehow sharper, cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. History will remember this day, and when it does, it won't remember your insults. It won't remember your tantrums. It will remember that in this chamber, the truth was spoken to power, and it will remember who tried to silence it and who refused to be silenced. The audience erupted again, louder than ever. Half the room roared with anger, half with triumph. Reporters shouted questions into the whirlwind. But in the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett stood like a warrior, her words blazing brighter than Trump's fire. And as the gavel struck, demanding order, one truth became undeniable. The sword of justice had been drawn, and Jasmine Crockett had just swung it. But Trump, Donald J. Trump, was never one to back down. Not to judges, not to journalists, and certainly not to a congresswoman who dared stand her ground. His face twisted red, veins pulsing at his temples. Then it came, a roar. "This is a farce," he bellowed, his voice echoing like cannon fire against the chamber walls. He slammed his hand against the desk, the sound cracking through the air like a gunshot. Papers jumped, microphones rattled, and aides flinched. "You people should be ashamed of yourselves," he thundered, pointing a trembling finger across the room. "Ashamed? You call this justice? You call this oversight? This is nothing but political theater. Pure garbage. You're all part of it." The chamber erupted in noise, gasps, shouts, cheers, boos. It was no longer a hearing. It was a battlefield without restraint. Trump rose half out of his seat, leaning over the desk like a general ready to launch an assault. His finger jabbed forward, this time aimed directly at Jasmine Crockett. "You," he snarled, his voice cracking with rage. "You think you're clever? You think you can stand there and lecture me? You're a lightweight, a puppet, nothing but a mouthpiece for the radical left." The crowd roared in response, half of them jeering, half of them shouting in outrage. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't blink, but the tension around her was suffocating, the air thick with fury. Trump's hand slammed the desk again, harder, his knuckles whitening under the impact. "And the media," he spat, whipping around to glare at the press gallery. "Look at them. Look at those cameras. Fake news. All of you. You twist every word I say, every breath I take. You don't report the truth. You invent lies. You're the real enemies of the people." Reporters shouted back, voices clashing in the storm. Flashbulbs exploded like lightning strikes, capturing every second of the meltdown. Trump's fists pounded the desk again and again, the rhythm violent, relentless. "Frauds," he howled. "All of you, sitting there clapping for her lies, clapping for her little speech. You think you've won something? You haven't won a damn thing. Because the American people, they know the truth. They know the witch hunt when they see it. They know who the real victim is here." The words spilled from him like lava, uncontrolled, unstoppable. His voice cracked, rose again, then cracked once more. His fingers stabbed the air, at Jasmine, at the journalists, at the lawmakers glaring back at him. The chamber had become a powder keg. On one side, Trump loyalists roared in his defense, some pounding their own fists on the tables in solidarity. "That's right. Tell him, Mr. President," they shouted, their voices a chorus of rage. On the other side, opponents shouted him down, their own voices sharp, furious, almost drowned in the storm. "Sit down, control yourself, respect the chamber." The gavel struck again and again, the chair's desperate attempts to restore order lost beneath the chaos. And still, Trump raged. "They can't silence me," he shouted, his face contorting. "They can't silence you. This is bigger than her, bigger than this chamber. This is about saving our country from liars, from traitors, from the corrupt swamp." His fist slammed again, so hard this time that one of his aides reached instinctively for his arm, only to be shoved away. The room teetered on the edge of violence. Members stood from their seats, shouting across the aisle. Staffers whispered urgently into phones. Capitol security shifted nervously at the edges of the room, ready but uncertain. And at the center of it all, Trump loomed like a storm, his words no longer just arguments but weapons, hurled at anyone within reach. "You!" he snarled once more at Jasmine, his voice almost a growl now. "You can't touch me. You can't stop me. You think your little papers and your little speeches mean anything? I made this country great once. I'll do it again, and nothing you say will change that." The air snapped with fury, the atmosphere trembling as though fists might fly, as though the hearing might collapse into a brawl. For a moment it felt as if the chamber itself could not contain the rage inside it. And as the gavel struck again, demanding silence, it was clear. This was no longer just a hearing. It was a war. But in every war, brute force is not enough. And Jasmine Crockett knew it. She didn't raise her voice to match Trump's roar. She didn't pound the desk or wave her arms. Instead, she leaned forward, voice steady, words sharpened like steel. "Mr. Trump," she began, her tone calm yet merciless, "you can scream all you want, but the facts, your facts, don't lie." The chamber froze. Her words cut through the air, clear, deliberate, leaving no room for escape. She raised a document in her hand, thick, stamped, undeniable. "This," she declared, holding it high, "is not opinion. This is evidence. Your signature, your dealings, your contradictions. You call this a witch hunt?" She leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "Then tell us, why did you sign off on payments you swore under oath you never authorized?" The crowd erupted again, a mix of cheers and gasps. Trump's face flickered, his confidence shaken for a heartbeat. He waved a hand dismissively, voice cracking. "Fake! Totally fake! More garbage!" But Jasmine didn't let him finish. She cut him off like a blade to the throat. "Answer the question, Mr. Trump. Yes or no?" Her voice had the force of a gavel itself. Trump hesitated, stumbling over words, trying to drown her out. But every deflection, every dodge only played into her hands. "You claim innocence," she pressed, voice rising now. "Yet every trail leads back to you. Payments, promises, lies stacked on lies. Are we supposed to believe that everyone else is lying? The accountants, the aides, the prosecutors, the journalists? Everyone but you?" The chamber roared again, divided like a stadium in the final minutes of a championship game. Trump leaned forward, jabbing his finger. "It's a conspiracy. All of them. They've been after me since day one." But Jasmine was already there, waiting for the move, waiting for the dodge. "And yet," she snapped back, "every single time you cry conspiracy, more evidence surfaces, more lies uncovered, more truth revealed. So tell us, are the photographs conspiracies too? The phone records? The wire transfers? Are the numbers on these documents lying, Mr. Trump? Numbers don't scream. They don't cry. They don't plot against you. Numbers don't take sides." Her words struck like hammer blows. Each syllable was an attack, every question a trap. Trump's face reddened deeper, sweat shining on his forehead. He tried to speak, but his words tangled with rage. "You're twisting everything. You're the liar here," he shouted. But Jasmine's eyes gleamed. This was no longer defense. This was the offensive strike. "Then prove it," she fired back, voice cutting. "Prove it right now. Show this chamber where the evidence is false. Show us, Mr. Trump, because all you've given us so far is shouting." The audience leaned forward, hanging on the clash. The air felt electric, alive, as though every word could ignite sparks. Trump shook his head violently, muttering about fake news and deep state. But Jasmine was relentless. Like a chess master forcing her opponent into check, she gave him no way out. Every time he moved, she was already there, ready to pin him back. "You say the media lies?" she asked, voice sharp. "Fine, but explain this. If the media lies, then why do your own words, recorded on tape, broadcast nationwide, contradict your testimony here today? Was it fake Trump on the phone? Fake Trump on camera? Or is the only fake thing here your story?" Gasps, shouts, applause. The chamber was no longer simply split, it was aflame. Trump slammed his hand against the desk again, voice cracking under the pressure. "I never said that. You're making it up." Jasmine didn't even blink. She turned a page in her binder, calm as a surgeon mid-operation. "Page 37, Mr. Trump," she said coldly. "Your exact words transcribed. Would you like me to read them aloud, or will you?" The room detonated in noise, an explosion of cheers, boos, curses, and cries. It was no longer a debate. It was a storm. But within the storm, Jasmine moved like lightning. Every word she threw was calculated, every document a dagger. She was not simply answering Trump. She was dismantling him, piece by piece, lie by lie, until his rage had nothing left to stand on. And the more he screamed, the smaller he seemed. The once commanding figure, the man who had dominated rallies and ruled headlines, was cornered. Cornered not by shouts, not by numbers in a crowd, but by facts wielded with precision, like blades in the hand of someone who knew exactly where to strike. The chamber no longer felt like a hearing. It felt like an execution, carried out not with ropes or swords, but with words, questions, and unflinching truth. Trump's supporters shouted louder, desperate to drown Jasmine out. But their noise only made her presence stronger, and when she spoke again, her voice sliced through the uproar with chilling clarity. "You can yell, you can pound the desk, you can blame the media, the courts, the swamp, but in the end, Mr. Trump, truth does not bow to tantrums." The silence that followed was brief, heavy, suffocating. Then the chamber erupted again. But the shift was undeniable. For the first time, Donald Trump looked less like a titan raging against the world, and more like a man trapped inside it. But just as the chamber caught its breath, the next move arrived like a lightning strike. A new witness was called. He was no firebrand, no polished politician. He was ordinary, mid-40s, pale, glasses slipping down his nose, his hands trembling as he adjusted the microphone. His voice cracked at first, thin and unsteady. My name is Robert Hayes," he began, "and I need this chamber to know I've been under pressure, intense pressure, from people tied directly to the White House." The crowd stiffened, the words slicing through the chamber like a blade. Gasps, murmurs, sudden movement. Trump leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing, lips curling into a mocking smile. Hayes continued, his hands shaking as he held a document. "They told me to stay quiet, to bury what I knew. They said my career would be over if I testified, and that my family might—" His voice faltered. He couldn't finish the sentence. And that was when Trump pounced. With a sneer curling his face, he leaned into the microphone and spat the words out like venom. "Pathetic, absolutely pathetic. Look at him, shaking, stuttering. This is your star witness? This coward?" The room exploded in uproar, voices clashing, shouts bouncing off the marble walls. But Trump wasn't done. He jabbed a finger toward Hayes, his voice rising with venomous force. "Maybe you should be scared, Robert. Maybe you should worry about your career, because lying under oath, lying about me, will ruin you faster than anything else. You think you can come in here and smear my name? You'll regret it." The words landed heavy, like fists thrown in the open. The chamber fell into stunned chaos, half the crowd gasping at the raw threat, the other half cheering it like blood sport. Hayes froze, his face draining of color. His lips trembled, his entire body quivering under the weight of the threat, delivered not in shadows but out loud on the record. And then Jasmine Crockett stood. "Enough!" Her voice cracked like thunder. The room stilled, not silent, but staggered, as if the force of her shout shoved the storm back for a heartbeat. She pointed directly at Trump, her words slicing through the chamber. "Did you just threaten a witness? In front of Congress? In front of the entire country?" Trump smirked, leaning back in his chair, voice dripping with mockery. "Oh, give me a break. It's not a threat. It's the truth. If he lies, he'll pay. That's how it works." But Jasmine's fury was uncontainable. She slammed her hand against the desk, her voice rising above the roar of the chamber. "No, Mr. Trump, that's not how justice works. That's how bullies work. That's how tyrants work. You just tried to intimidate a man into silence? On live television. Do you even hear yourself?" The chamber erupted again. Boos, cheers, shouts clashing in a deafening wave. Hayes gripped the microphone tighter, his knuckles white, his voice barely above a whisper. They told me this would happen. They told me he'd come after me, no matter what. And Jasmine turned to him, her voice softening, protective. Mr. Hayes, you are not alone. Not here. Not today. This chamber is supposed to defend the truth, not destroy it. And I promise you, we will not let intimidation win. Her words poured across the room, fierce yet steady, like a shield rising against the storm. Trump laughed bitterly, shaking his head, trying to drown her out. Spare me the theatrics. Nobody cares about this trembling little nobody. You people are desperate, dragging cowards in here to prop up your witch hunt. Pathetic. But Jasmine shot back, her tone like steel. Pathetic? You're the one reduced to threats, Mr. Trump. You're the one lashing out at a citizen who dared to speak the truth. You call yourself a leader, but leaders don't silence the weak. They protect them. What you just did, what the whole nation just witnessed, is the language of a dictator. The words hit like lightning, igniting the chamber into open chaos. Republicans shouted across the aisle, defending Trump, voices booming, "He's right. That man is lying." "This whole hearing is a sham," Democrats fired back, their fury unleashed. "Witness intimidation on the record. Is this your idea of justice?" The gavel pounded over and over, but it was drowned beneath the storm. The chamber had transformed into a battlefield, not of policies or laws, but of raw survival, of truth versus power, of a witness trembling under the weight of history. Hayes bowed his head, trembling still, but he stayed in his seat. He hadn't fled. He hadn't broken. And Jasmine stood like a wall of fire beside him, her glare locked on Trump. "This," she said, voice thundering through the chaos, "isn't just politics anymore. This is about the very soul of justice, and the whole world is watching." The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the silence before a greater storm. Because in that moment, the hearing was no longer about documents or signatures or numbers. It was about fear, about power, about whether truth could survive the weight of intimidation. And as Trump leaned back, smirking again, the nation realized something chilling. He had just proven Jasmine's point, but Jasmine wasn't finished, not even close. She let the silence hang, her eyes sweeping across the chamber, across the faces frozen between outrage and fear. Then she placed her hand on a small black device resting on her desk. The room seemed to shrink around it, anticipation thickening the air. "Mr. Trump," she said slowly, her voice measured, calm but cutting. "You can scream all you want about witch hunts and fake news. You can belittle witnesses and bark threats. But sometimes, the truth has a voice of its own." Her thumb pressed the button. A sharp click echoed through the chamber, followed by static. Then came a voice, Trump's voice. The sound was unmistakable, raspy, confident, laced with the same cadence that had dominated rallies and podiums for years. "Tell him to keep his mouth shut. We'll take care of him later. No one crosses me and walks away clean." The words played out in slow motion, each syllable slicing into the chamber like shards of glass. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Not a cough, not a whisper, not even the rustle of papers. The silence was suffocating, as if the building itself held its breath. Trump's face drained of color. The smirk evaporated. "Fake!" he suddenly roared, leaping forward, his hands slamming against the table so hard the microphone screeched. "That's fake! A setup! You doctored that. Everyone knows it." But the recording kept playing, his own voice bleeding into the stunned chamber. "Do what you have to do. Family, money, jobs. We have leverage. Use it. Make him afraid." The final word, afraid, hung like smoke, choking the air. Gasps rippled across the room. A woman in the gallery covered her mouth. Someone dropped a pen, the tiny clatter echoing like thunder. Jasmine didn't blink. She let the recording finish, then clicked the device off with a decisive snap. "This," she said, her voice steady, resonant, "is not rumor, not spin, not opinion. This is your voice, Mr. Trump. Ordering intimidation, ordering fear. Trump's face contorted, red blotches spreading across his cheeks. You're lying. That's AI garbage. You people will stoop to anything. But his tone wasn't the triumphant defiance of a fighter. It was the shrill panic of a man cornered. Half the chamber erupted in cheers, their voices rising with vindication. There it is! Finally the truth! The other half thundered back in fury. Lies! Witch hunt! This is propaganda! The clash of voices rose so violently it felt like the walls themselves might crack. Reporters scrambled in the aisles, typing furiously, cameras swiveling, the world outside now a storm of breaking alerts. Inside, the chamber was tearing in two. One side demanded accountability, pointing, shouting, their rage fueled by the damning proof. The other side shouted just as loud, hands pounding tables, denying, deflecting, desperate to bury the fire that had just been lit. And at the center of it all stood Jasmine, unflinching, her eyes locked on Trump. You can deny it, you can scream it's fake, she said, her voice cutting through the bedlam like a blade. But the country just heard you, and no denial can erase what's been recorded. You built your empire on fear, Mr. Trump, but fear won't save you now. Truth will. Trump jabbed his finger across the table, his voice cracking with rage. You're finished. Do you hear me? Finished. Nobody believes this garbage. I'll sue every last one of you. I'll burn this place down before I let you smear me. His words weren't just denial anymore. They were desperation, the frantic howl of a man watching the ground collapse beneath him. The gallery roared back in chaos, people shouting, some standing, some shaking fists, others screaming for order. Security moved closer, tense, eyes darting between the opposing waves of fury. Jasmine, still steady, raised her voice above the storm. This chamber is not a circus. This is the people's house, and the people just heard the truth. We can choose chaos, or we can choose justice. But either way, history will not forget this moment. The chamber erupted again, half in thunderous applause, half in enraged boos. And somewhere in the madness, the fragile line between politics and raw survival finally snapped, because the truth had been spoken, and once spoken, it could never be taken back. Jasmine leaned forward, her knuckles pressing against the desk, her voice sharp as a blade cutting through the roar of the chamber. Answer the question, Mr. Trump. Did you or did you not order threats against a witness? The demand cracked across the hall like a whip. No hesitation. No room for retreat. All eyes snapped to Trump. For a flicker of a second, he froze, his mouth half open, his eyes darting left and right, searching for a way out. Then he erupted. I don't answer to you, he bellowed, his fist slamming the table so hard the microphones rattled. You're nothing but a loudmouth fraud, a third-rate hack pretending to play prosecutor. Jasmine didn't blink. She leaned in closer, her voice unwavering. This isn't about me. This is about you. Did you say those words? Did you order intimidation? Yes or no? Trump's face twisted, red blooming into purple, veins pulsing at his temples. He spat his words like venom. Liar! Witch! You people are sick. You take scraps of audio, you twist them, you create garbage, nothing but garbage. And you want me to sit here and dignify it with an answer? Not a chance. The chamber shook with chaos. Supporters shouted in approval, their fists pounding the desks in rhythm. Opponents fired back, chanting, Answer! Answer! Over the roar. Jasmine raised her hand for silence, but her eyes never left Trump. You can scream, you can insult, you can run in circles, but the country is watching, and I'll ask again. Did you or did you not give that order? Trump leaned across the table, his face inches from the microphone, his voice dropping into a snarl. Go to hell, Jasmine. You and your pathetic circus. I never ordered anything, and anyone who says otherwise is a liar. You're a liar. Your so-called witnesses are liars. This whole process is one giant lie. His voice cracked, but he pushed louder, drowning himself in fury. You want a confession? You'll never get one. You want me to bow to you? Never. You're beneath me. Gasps shot through the gallery. Even some of his allies shifted uncomfortably, the sheer ferocity of his words teetering on the edge of collapse. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Instead, she spoke with the piercing calm of someone who knew she had struck the rawest nerve. Mr. Trump, the more you scream, the clearer the truth becomes. You call me a liar, yet the evidence speaks with your voice. You call this a circus, yet you're the one performing. This country deserves an answer, not a tantrum. So I'll ask a third time. Yes or no? The room went still again. A battle of silence and breath, like two predators circling in the same cage. Trump's chest heaved, his jaw clenched so hard the muscles quivered. And then he snapped. You disgusting little nobody, he roared, pointing a trembling finger at her. You've never built a damn thing in your life. I built empires, I filled stadiums, I made history. And now you think you can stand there and lecture me? You're trash, trash. The words hit like gunshots. The chamber erupted into pandemonium. Some cheered wildly, drunk on the raw spectacle of his defiance. Others shouted in horror, booing, screaming back at him. The sound surged to a fever pitch, echoing like thunder inside a steel drum. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her voice slicing straight into the chaos. You've just proven everything I've said. You have no defense, only insults, only rage, only the language of a man cornered with no way out. Her words struck like arrows, deliberate, unshakable. Trump slammed his palm on the desk again, his face a mask of fury. No way out. I always have a way out. I fight. I win. You think you've trapped me? This is my arena, not yours. You're weak, Jasmine. Weak and pathetic. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her voice now a low growl. Then answer the question. Trump's lips curled into something between a snarl and a smile, his words dripping with scorn. The answer is, you're not worth an answer. The crowd detonated. Shouts, boos, screams of rage and triumph all collided in one deafening roar. Security pushed forward, trying to keep order, but the energy was uncontrollable. Jasmine stood tall, her presence cutting through the chaos like steel. You just gave your answer, she said firmly, her voice steady despite the storm. And the people heard it loud and clear. Trump lunged forward as if to rise from his seat, veins bulging, his voice ragged. I'm not done. You hear me? I'm not done. But for the first time, it wasn't power that filled his words, it was desperation, and Jasmine knew it. Jasmine. The two of them stood there, glaring at each other across the battlefield of desks and microphones. Two predators locked in combat, the air between them vibrating with the weight of history. The chamber had become a cage, and inside it, two beasts clashed with nothing left to lose. Trump's chest heaved, his eyes blazing with the wild fury of a cornered animal. Then, with a voice that shook the rafters, he spat the word like a bullet. Traitor! The chamber gasped as if struck. You're a traitor to your country, Jasmine Crockett, Trump thundered, his finger stabbing the air like a dagger. You don't care about America. You only care about tearing it apart. You hate freedom. You hate the people. You hate me because I stand for everything you'll never be. The word echoed. Traitor, 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 spreading through the hall like poison smoke. Jasmine didn't move. Her hands gripped the table, her knuckles white, but her eyes never left him. She knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to brand her with a scar that could never fade, but Trump wasn't finished. You should be ashamed of yourself, he bellowed, spit flying from his lips. Standing here, pretending to be some champion of truth while you sell this country to the highest bidder. You don't deserve to sit in that chair. You don't deserve to breathe the same air as patriots. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Some of his supporters shot to their feet, fists raised, voices booming in unison. She's the traitor! She's the traitor! The chant spread like wildfire, crashing against the marble walls, drowning the order of the chamber in raw hysteria. Jasmine finally raised her hand for silence, but the noise only grew louder. Trump leaned back, feeding on the chaos he had unleashed, his smirk returning like a shadow crawling back into place. One of his closest allies stood up, jabbing a finger toward Jasmine. This entire hearing is a sham, a disgrace. We demand it end right now. Others followed, slamming fists on desks, shouting over one another. Witch hunt! Political persecution! Shut it down! The chamber was no longer a hearing. It was a battlefield. Jasmine's voice cut through the roar, clear and sharp, though her pulse hammered in her chest. Mr. Trump, threats and slander will not erase the truth. Calling me a traitor doesn't make your actions disappear. Answer for them, like every citizen of this nation must. Trump's face twisted, his roar shaking the microphones. You don't get to question me. I made this country great. I put America first while you, people like you, stabbed her in the back. You're the traitors, every last one of you sitting there pretending you're holy saints. His allies cheered, pounding the desks harder. The sound was a war drum. Jasmine felt the weight of history pressing against her. She knew this was bigger than her, bigger than Trump. This was a clash of visions for the soul of the country, and Trump was using every ounce of venom to keep his grip. Threats don't frighten me, she shot back, her voice steady as steel. I will not bow to your rage. This chamber will not bow. The truth is stronger than your insults. Trump's lips curled, his voice dropping to a growl that carried more menace than a scream. You think you're safe, Jasmine? Keep pushing. Keep testing me. You'll regret it. The room froze. It was no longer just politics. It was a threat. Security stirred at the edges, tense, ready. But Jasmine stood tall, meeting his glare head-on. You've already lost, Mr. Trump, she said, her tone low, controlled. Because the moment you threaten, the mask comes off, and the people see you for what you are. The crowd erupted again, some cheering him louder than ever, others shouting in outrage, the chamber splitting into two furious halves. It was no longer debate, it was war. One lawmaker leapt from his seat, pointing at Jasmine, his voice ragged with fury. You're destroying this country with your lies. Another shouted back from across the aisle. Sit down, this isn't your rally. The clash spread like fire across dry fields. The chamber was drowning in chaos, chants, screams, fists slamming wood. Every word, every gesture added another crack to the foundation of order. Trump sat back, basking in the storm he had created, his chest rising and falling with a twisted pride. For him, chaos wasn't danger. It was fuel. But Jasmine refused to yield. She rose to her feet, her voice cutting like a sword through the bedlam. This hearing will not be silenced, not by shouting, not by threats, and not by a man who thinks he is above the law. For a brief moment, her words pierced the storm, commanding attention, but only for a moment, because the storm was no longer under control. It had become a political battlefield, and the chamber itself was the ground they fought upon. And as the walls shook with rage, one truth became undeniable. The hearing was no longer about justice. It was about survival. The air inside the chamber was suffocating, thick with rage and sweat, voices clashing like blades in the dark. But through the storm, Jasmine Crockett did not falter. She stood tall, her hand steady as it reached for the folder resting before her. The folder she had guarded like a weapon. The folder that contained the blow Trump could never dodge. For a split second, time seemed to hold its breath. Enough, she said, her voice cutting like steel through the chaos. Heads snapped toward her. The shouting dimmed. Not into silence, but into an uneasy rumble, like thunder rolling just beyond the horizon. Jasmine opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers, then held them high for all to see. Her voice sharpened with each word, precise, unshakable. This, she declared, slamming the first document onto the table, is the signed memorandum, with your name, Mr. Trump, your approval, your order. The chamber gasped as the microphones carried the sound of paper striking wood. Trump's smirk flickered, the mask cracking. And this, she continued, lifting another sheet, is the financial trail. Direct transfers, millions of dollars routed through shell companies, all traced back to your closest allies. Every transaction signed off under your administration. The murmurs grew into a low roar. Cameras zoomed in. Screens lit up with her every move. She wasn't finished. Her hand trembled only slightly as she drew the final page, the one piece no one could deny. A recorded transcript, word for word, his own voice commanding actions he had sworn never to have touched. This, Jasmine said, her voice booming now, is your voice, your words. No spin, no excuse. Proof that you betrayed the oath you swore to the American people. She pressed play. Trump's voice filled the chamber, unmistakable, undeniable. And in that instant, the entire hall shook, not from noise but from the weight of truth slamming down like a hammer of judgment. Trump's face drained of color, then flushed a furious red. His jaw worked furiously, but no words came. For the first time, he was silent. The silence lasted only a heartbeat before the chamber exploded. Half the room erupted in outrage, voices screaming, fingers jabbing toward Trump. The other half roared in protest, defending him with chants, slamming their fists in defiance. The gallery was on fire, divided straight down the middle. No longer an audience, but rival armies locked in a war of words. But Jasmine stood at the center, unshaken, her eyes locked on Trump's. "Look at me," she demanded, her voice shaking with controlled fury. "Look at me and tell this chamber, tell this country, that it isn't your signature, that it isn't your voice. Look the people in the eye and deny it." Trump's lips parted, but no sound came. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. Sweat rolled down his temples, glistening under the harsh lights. His eyes burned red, darting wildly, searching for an escape that wasn't there. "Say it!" Jasmine roared. But Trump stayed silent, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. The silence was louder than any confession. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Some of his staunchest allies sank back into their seats, their faces pale, their eyes betraying doubt. Others shouted louder, desperate to smother the truth with noise. "Fake!" one screamed. "Lies!" another bellowed. But their voices rang hollow, brittle against the solidity of the evidence. The speaker's gavel pounded for order, but it was useless. The chamber was alive, shaking, each faction shouting as though volume alone could rewrite reality. And in the middle of it all, Trump's silence screamed the loudest. His chest heaved, sweat dripping onto the desk, his eyes bloodshot with rage and humiliation. He looked like a man caged, not by bars, but by his own words, his own actions, now turned against him like knives. Jasmine pressed forward, her tone cold, unyielding. "You can curse me. You can call me names. You can scream traitor until your throat bleeds. But the truth stands, Mr. Trump, and the truth will not bow to you." The gallery roared again, cheers and jeers colliding in a storm. Some rose to their feet, fists pumping in triumph. Others shouted back, veins bulging in their necks, spittle flying in rage. The chamber was no longer divided by desks, it was divided by reality itself. But Jasmine stood like a pillar in the center of the storm, unshaken, immovable. She had delivered the strike, the blow from which there was no recovery. Trump tried to speak, his mouth opening, closing, soundless. Then at last he managed a broken growl. This is a setup, a lie. But his voice faltered, words collapsing beneath the weight of evidence. For the first time, Donald Trump, master of the stage, king of the counterpunch, was speechless. And the world saw it. The cameras caught the sweat dripping down his face, the trembling of his lips, the silence stretching into eternity. There was no spin strong enough, no slogan loud enough, no insult sharp enough to bury the truth now laid bare. The chamber had become a battlefield, but Jasmine had just fired the decisive shot, and everyone knew it. The silence that followed was unbearable, a silence so sharp it cut deeper than screams. Every eye in the room turned to Donald Trump. Once he had thrived under that gaze. He had fed on it, twisted it, bent it to his will. But now the light that had once crowned him burned like a spotlight of judgment. His chest rose and fell heavily. The sweat pouring down his face gleamed under the camera flashes. Every beat magnified and broadcast to the world. His lips trembled, trying to form words, but nothing came. The mighty line of the arena looked cornered, his roar reduced to a broken rasp. For years, Trump's arrogance had been his shield, his smirk his weapon. But in this moment, the mask cracked. The arrogance didn't vanish. It twisted into desperation. "Fake," he whispered hoarsely, barely audible, a word that once had ignited armies of followers. Now it sounded like the plea of a man drowning. The chamber did not move. The silence pressed heavier. Then from the gallery, a voice shouted, "Liar!" It struck like a whip and others followed. Traitor! Shame! The words cascaded from the crowd, relentless, each one piercing deeper, sharper. Trump's head jerked, his eyes darting wildly across the room as if searching for a single loyal face to cling to. But even there, the ground was crumbling. His allies, men and women who once rose in his defense like knights around a king, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some avoided his eyes altogether, staring down at their hands, their papers, the floor. Others whispered frantically to one another, voices sharp with panic. And a few, just a few, slid their chairs back, putting distance between themselves and him, as if proximity itself was poison. The empire he had built, the fortress of loyalty forged through fear and ambition, was trembling at its core. Trump pounded the desk with his fist, the sound desperate rather than commanding. "You think this proves anything?" he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of its own fury. "This is all lies, all of it, a setup against me." But his words no longer soared. They stumbled, heavy and hollow, and fell flat against the stone walls of reality. No one rose to echo him. No one cheered. No chant came to lift him from the abyss. And that was when it struck him. He was alone. The realization showed in his eyes, wide and bloodshot, as he scanned the chamber. Once those eyes had glowed with fire. Now they glistened with fear. Every gaze locked on him felt like a blade. Every whisper, a dagger. Every silence, a grave being dug beneath his feet. Trump tried again, forcing his voice louder, but it broke with each word. "They're coming after me because they fear me, because they know I'm strong, stronger than her, stronger than all of you." But the words collapsed mid-sentence, his throat tightening, the strength draining out. The cameras caught it all, the faltering speech, the trembling hands, the sweat-drenched suit. A man once untouchable was unraveling before the world's eyes, and the world would not forget. Jasmine stood silent, her arms crossed, her gaze unflinching. She didn't need to strike again. The truth had done the work. Trump was fighting himself now, battling shadows, drowning in his own denials. A senator to his right leaned back and whispered to a colleague, too low to hear. But the movement was enough. Trump saw it. His allies were abandoning him. One by one, their loyalty wavered, their silence deafening, their distance growing. Not out of courage, out of fear. The same fear that had once bound them to him was now dragging them away. Trump's voice dropped into a growl. "You cowards, all of you. You'd be nothing without me." But the words landed limp, brittle, like ash falling from a dying flame. The audience in the gallery shifted restlessly. Their eyes were merciless, piercing into him like 1,000 knives. Once he had commanded crowds with ease, bending them with slogans and spectacle. Now every gaze was judgment, every stare a sentence. His hand twitched on the desk, gripping the edge as though it could anchor him, but nothing could steady the collapse. The empire was shaking, the foundation crumbling, and the king was cornered, stripped of his crown, laid bare in the harshest light. For the first time in years, Donald Trump looked not like a leader, not even like a fighter, but like a man defeated. The chamber didn't cheer. It didn't need to. The sound of his collapse was louder than any applause. Trump slumped in his chair, his shoulders sagging, his face pale beneath the harsh lights. His mouth moved in broken fragments, muttering curses under his breath. But the power behind those words had long since evaporated. The cameras captured every twitch, every bitter whisper. Once his rants had commanded the airwaves. Now they looked pitiful, the echoes of a man clawing at the ruins of his own empire. And across from him, calm, unwavering, radiant, stood Jasmine CRUSHES. She hadn't moved for several seconds, letting the silence stretch, letting the world see the full weight of what had just unfolded. The truth needed no rush. It lingered in the air, undeniable, unshakable. Finally, she stepped forward, each stride deliberate, her heels striking the floor with the steady rhythm of inevitability. The chamber seemed to lean toward her, every eye magnetized by her presence. The cameras panned, hungry, desperate to frame the moment. Jasmine placed her hand on the lectern. She lifted her chin, her voice rising, steady and clear, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Today," she began, her tone ringing with conviction, "we prove something greater than any one person, greater than wealth, greater than titles, greater than power." She paused, letting her words sink in. The chamber was still, the silence taut with anticipation. "Justice," she declared, her voice swelling, "does not bow, not to money, not to fear, not to intimidation, not even to the loudest man in the room." The impact was immediate. The gallery erupted. Cheers, whistles, applause, the sound crashing like a tidal wave against the walls. Jasmine's words carried beyond the chamber, spilling through cameras and microphones into living rooms, onto phones, into the ears of millions watching live. A generation hungry for courage heard her and felt their chests swell with hope. She continued, her voice unwavering, her eyes locked on the man slumped across from her. "You can try to silence us. You can try to bully us. You can try to buy your way past truth. But today proves what we have always known deep inside. Justice may bend, but it will never, ever break." The gallery roared louder, a storm of sound. Reporters scribbled frantically. Cameras flashed in a frenzy, immortalizing her stance, her expression, her every word. Trump shifted uncomfortably, his hands gripping the arms of his chair, knuckles white. He rose slowly, his body heavy, his face twisted into a grimace. "Still," he muttered under his breath, strings of insults, fragments of denial, but they were lost beneath the thunder of the crowd. He looked small now, a shadow of the towering presence he once commanded. Every step toward the exit felt like a retreat. Every muttered curse sounded like surrender. The flashbulbs followed him, but not in adoration. They tracked his defeat, capturing the fall of a man who once believed himself untouchable. Jasmine did not turn to watch him go. Her focus was forward, her eyes steady, her voice unwavering. She raised her hand, signaling calm to the storm of cheers. The crowd settled, the noise dimming until her words could be heard again. "This fight was never about me," she said softly, but her words carried, amplified by conviction. "It was about us, about everyone who has ever been told to stay quiet, about everyone who has ever felt powerless, about everyone who has been made to believe that truth can be buried." Her voice strengthened, fire rising in her tone. "No matter how dark the night, no matter how heavy the shadow, we rise. And today we proved it." The chamber shook with applause once more, louder, wilder, unrestrained. Jasmine stepped back, her silhouette illuminated by the flashes, her figure etched into memory. She was no longer just a congresswoman, no longer just a voice in a crowded room. She had become a symbol of defiance, a symbol of truth, a symbol of a generation unwilling to kneel before corruption. Reporters' phones buzzed furiously, headlines already being written in real time. "Crockett crushes Trump. A new voice of justice emerges. The fall of power, the rise of courage." And outside the chamber, crowds gathered, chanting her name, their voices merging into a roar that spilled into the night. Inside, Trump's figure disappeared through the doors, swallowed by shadows, his curses trailing off into nothingness. He looked back once, his face etched with rage and disbelief, but the world was no longer listening. The focus had shifted. The cameras stayed on Jasmine. Her hand still rested on the lectern, her eyes glimmering with both exhaustion and triumph. She had fought a battle no one thought she could win, and won it. In that moment, she wasn't just Jasmine Crockett. She was the face of resistance, the voice of a people, the spark that lit a fire against the darkness. The chamber thundered again with cheers, with chants, with the sound of history being written in real time. And Jasmine, standing tall, let the storm of triumph wash over her. She had not just fought, she had not just won, she had become a symbol, and symbols once born do not fade, not tonight, not ever. In the end, it was never about one voice silencing another, but about truth refusing to be buried. Power built on arrogance may roar, but it always crumbles when confronted by courage. What Jasmine showed the world is simple yet timeless. Integrity is stronger than intimidation, and justice, though tested, will never kneel. Let us carry that lesson beyond this chamber, into our homes, our choices, our lives, remembering that even in the darkest rooms, one clear voice can light the way for all. If this story made your heart race, don't just move on. Pause, think. Share it with someone who still believes courage can shatter corruption. Like, comment, and send it to those who refuse to let power rewrite the truth. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where every silence is broken and every lie meets its reckoning. Turn on the bell, because the next story won't be comfortable, it will be fierce, and it might just change the way you see justice. This story is a fictional dramatization inspired by real struggles, real abuse of power, and the unbreakable spirit of those who resist. Any resemblance to actual people or events is coincidental or symbolic, meant for reflection and critique. Thank you for watching. Because justice doesn't whisper, it demands to be heard. This is Harrison Stories.